Doesn't mean there's no role for schools to provide, education to children in these areas. But we need to be careful of not going down the route where we're seeing that comprehensive sex education is a solution to these problems. It's not. We should be focusing more on the underlying virtues, on providing good, positive messages to boys and to girls in terms of chastity, but also more broadly in terms of what developing into young men and women and developing healthy relationships with each other.
Professor David Peyton, what a joy to talk to you. So anybody who doesn't know you, let's remind people you are an industrial economist from University of Nottingham, and you do an awful lot of writing around things like RSE and the content of sexual education, and the fact that sometimes it might have counterintuitive effects. And let's just take a moment and say hi to our viewers and our listeners.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be with you, Tony. And yes, I'm afraid economists, we get our tentacles in everywhere, and we're interested in human behaviour and looking at when a policy comes in, what impact does that have on how people act, and then could that have counterintuitive outcomes that you weren't expecting? So it's one of the things that economists do quite a lot.
Well, listen, the Prime Minister's been watching telly again, and he's been watching something called Adolescence, which is a Netflix drama, and he's referred to it a couple of times now as a documentary, but it's not. It's a fictional drama, and he seems to be making policy on the hoof nationally by talking about what's in this drama, this 15 rated drama, which he now wants to show in schools up and down the country to children as young as 11. And let's start there. Do you think that's a great idea?
You've expressed what the problem is straight away, that it's a 15 rated documentary. The idea you can show it in schools to under 15s is a worrying one. And indeed, you may have seen there's a petition going around from leading experts in educational field who are very worried about this, and they're talking about previous films on child sexual exploitation that were shown in schools at one point, and it was felt actually it was inappropriate, and they were withdrawn. And they're calling for this video not to be shown in schools. So there is a worry. I think we need to separate out two things. You can have something that's a great drama, really interesting, thought-provoking, and may even, lead to some food for thought for politicians. There's a difference between that and then focusing a whole policy agenda around a particular drama, in this case, adolescence. And I think that's where the problem is, because the drama focuses on a 13-year-old boy in a stable family with a mum and dad, and that's really interesting how he ends up going down a route and ends up murdering a girl, and that's a tragic story. And of course, we know violence against women is a really serious issue. But is that the heart of what the problem is of violence against women in this country? Almost certainly not. The issues are to do with knife crime, to do with gang violence, the link to sort of rap culture and explicit videos, and that sort of violent culture around society, the early sexualization of children, which we know goes on. Also, we can't exclude the sort of gender issues where there's a grey area between what is a man and what is a woman, and you've seen in that transgender identity debates, violence carried out against women by biological men. So there's all sorts of real issues here which are quite serious and worthy of policy discussion. It's not clear that a young 13-year-old in a stable family getting sort of being made awoke, if you like, by online videos and then taking that out on girls who've been bullying him is the real policy issue to be addressed here. So I think that's my concern, the way this has been politicized as opposed to just being an interesting drama.
Yeah, absolutely right, and it's full of very graphic content and adult themes. And there's no plan to give any kind of counselling alongside the showing of the film. There's no preparation of teachers to deal with the fallout of what can be very emotionally severe experiences for children who aren't exposed to these sorts of things on a regular basis. Not only that, but the film or the series deals with it trivializes and makes normal sexual activity between 13-year-olds and doesn't deal with the issue of consent, doesn't deal with the issue of the age of consent, anything like that in anywhere near an appropriate way. And it also, as you say, it stigmatizes, essentially young working class boys. Just 2 weeks after, we've had the Lost Boys report from the Centre for Social Justice saying that very group needs support, not stigmatization.
Yeah, it's a worry, and like lots of these things, at heart there's a genuine issue of misogyny and boys' attitudes to girls, but then that is used as a solution that may end up making things worse. So I'm worried with it. This seems a very coordinated program. So the government is straight away saying, well, this is going to be shown across schools. They're involving an organisation called Tender, who are very involved in providing sex education, and they have a particular agenda to have comprehensive sex education from a very early age, from the age of 5. They have a very sort of, let's say, I would call extreme approach to gender in terms of gender identity, and suggesting that gender is something that's assigned at birth rather than a real thing linked to sex. And so the danger is that with this agenda, you end up going down a route where there's sort of professional sex education organisations who we know have done a lot of damage within schools over the past 30, 40 years, then given yet more public funds to pursue their agenda, which may not be beneficial for children. So we've got groups like Tender and also the notorious Brooke, who are perhaps even worse in terms of their extremist approach to sexualising young children. And we know that lots of the messages from these sort of professional sex education bodies are sort of muddying the idea of the age of consent, the idea that children should be able to have sex when they feel ready for it, and the solution to early sexual activity is just to provide contraception and abortion to underage children, rather than to really focus on the role of parents, on the role of underlying virtues such as chastity and a genuine positive approach to relationships and looking to long-term marriage. So the danger is that this program is being used as a sort of Trojan horse to get an old agenda of pushing an inappropriate version of sex education on schools. So that's one of the things I'm worried about.
Right, it does seem very coordinated. It's not lost on me that this is the first week of the PM's new director of communications, who previously worked at TikTok, who are very good at influencing young people. And you're right that there's something seems like it's going on there. But it's interesting to note that we know 1 in 4 of our children grow up in single-parent families, and 85% of those single-parent families are mums. And we also know that there's a very high correlation between fatherlessness and the prison population, for example. I know single parents do their best. I had a single parent mum, and I know she did her best. But the stats are the stats, and yet he doesn't look at things like, well, actually, maybe we should be persuading biological mums and dads to stay together and bring up their kids together, because fathers are really, really important. And that seems another thing which is completely missed off the agenda.
Yeah, it is. Politicians seem to unwilling to talk about marriage, and a mum and a dad bringing up their children as being the best outcome. Now, we know statistically, of course, that is a case on average. There can be exceptions and it can go wrong, but we know in terms of drug abuse, teenage pregnancy, mental health, suicide issues, schooling, educational outcomes, these are associate much better if on average within traditional marriage. I think politicians are understandably nervous because they don't want to be seen as sort of attacking single parents and saying, you're not doing a good enough job. And I think we have to find a way of, doing both those things. We know that single parents can do a wonderful job, and outcomes, of course, can be great, and they can try and find appropriate role models. Yep. But we need to be saying, we recognise a wonderful job, but still, on average, from a policy point of view, yep, to say, well, it's still worthwhile trying to encourage this sort of ideal situation where a mum and a dad bring up their children where possible. It's not always going to work out in every case. It's something that we can encourage. So I think politicians can do a much better job and shouldn't be afraid of trying to talk about both those things. The other thing we need to be careful about is the messages we give to boys. So there's a very interesting report I'm sure you'll have seen from the Family Education Trust, I think it was last year, really focusing on this, looking at the way in which the idea of toxic masculinity is taught in schools. And of course, that can be a danger, the way young men and the messages they're given. But the solution sometimes is to target boys and to say, well, you are the problem. And traditional, male traits, which, can be very good in themselves, taken to an extreme, they may not be, but in themselves, they can be good. Focusing on those as a problem. And the message that boys can get is that, oh, we are the problem. And we are the problem for being boys. And of course, that's completely the wrong message to get over. And schools need to find a way of providing positive role models to boys, encouraging sensible, healthy relationships. This doesn't have to be within sex education. We know traditional sex education in schools has the evidence has very poor outcomes in terms of the influence it has on teenage pregnancy, STIs, on child sexual abuse, and so on. The evidence is not good for that. For that, it doesn't mean there's no role for schools to provide, education to children in these areas. But we need to be careful of not going down the route where we're seeing that comprehensive sex education is a solution to these problems. It's not. We should be focusing more on the underlying virtues, on providing good, positive messages to boys and to girls in terms of chastity, but also more broadly in terms of what developing into young men and women and developing healthy relationships with each other.
Yeah, and that FET report estimated that a third of all boys are taught you are fundamentally flawed because you're a boy and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, forget social media. If your teacher's telling you that, that's bad news, and that needs to stop. You're absolutely right, and we need to start teaching things like, as you said, respecting boundaries, respecting things like sex and the importance of it, teaching things like the benefits of growing up with a biological married mum and dad. Those are the things which statistically make a difference in society. And David, honestly, we should recommend that Sir Keir Starmer stops watching so much telly and starts spending more time talking to experts like you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure.